Hey everyone, Tactics here, bringing you another Mythic Plus guide for Season 3 of Dragonflight, this time covering the first half of the Dawn of the Infinite Mega Dungeon, Galakrond's Fall. Similar to my other guide videos, which can be found either linked in the description or over on my channel, I'll be walking you through all of the trash mobs and bosses, kind of explaining their abilities and how to handle them, and I'll also be walking you through a simple pug-friendly route that will be great for early on in the season. If you're looking for other resources, check out my Season 3 ability tracker, again linked down in the description below. It basically just has every single trash ability in the season and explains what they do in a nice little Google Sheet format, so check that out for sure. Also, if you haven't heard, I'm actually going to be partnering with Method this season to bring you guys written guides for every single dungeon, so be sure to check those out as well, again linked in the description. Alright, we've talked enough, so let's get into the dungeon, where you're going to start off by fighting a few different infinite dragons. So the first is the Infinite Time Slicer. These guys have a single ability in Tempo Slice. This is a channel onto the tank, and basically each melee hit in this channel will apply a stacking 60% damage taken magic debuff to the tank. So very important you use a CC to stop these channels from going off, and then any magic stacks that are on the tank, make sure that gets dispelled ASAP, because it's very easy for tanks to just kind of get deleted if this starts stacking up. Infinite Chrono Weavers are also in this area, and they have a random target cast in Chrono Melt. Make sure that this channel is either interrupted or stopped with a CC, because its damage can be pretty high as well. Epoch Rippers are the final add in this area. They also have a single ability. This is Time Rip, so they're going to basically instantly teleport to a random player and start doing a bit of a Blade Storm effect. So just make sure you're a little pre-spread when you're pulling these guys, and move as soon as you can once the Time Rip goes off. The boss in this area is also an Infinite Dragon in Chronikar, and what you'll notice not only for this boss, but basically all of the Mega Dungeon bosses this season, is that they're going to pull their mechanic set from the heroic versions, not the Mythic Zero version, so it makes them a little bit easier there. So the big thing is Sand Stomp. You want to make sure that you're spread kind of along the edges of the room and overlap your circle with other players or with previously placed puddles, but make sure you're not actually like putting your circle around them. Just overlap with their own circle so you don't cleave each other and conserve the most space. As you drop these circles, I do recommend kind of rotating around the room. There are a couple different strategies. You can just keep dropping in a line and slowly make your way across the room, or you can drop around the edges and rotate around the room. Either works pretty well, so do whatever you deem fit. Eon Shatter is the leap targeted on a random player, and this is only going to happen twice on Mythic Plus. So again, that circle is going to go out. It's a big circle here. It's going to smash on the ground. It's a one shot if you get hit. It's going to shoot out a bunch of Eon fragments, so make sure you avoid those. And then there's a single Eon residue soak every leap that you need to make sure one person gets into, or it's going to be probably a wipe. Just make sure if you're targeted by the Eon Shatter, you don't run this super far away. You want it to be relatively close to the group so that someone can get in and get that soak quickly. Tanks, just make sure you have a defensive up for that Chrono Shear hit, and be aware, work with the healer here, remove that healing absorb it applies as fast as possible, save big self-healing. Healers, make sure you're blasting healing into the tank there, and once that healing absorb is actually gone, make sure healers that you do dispel the sheared lifespan magic effect. Moving on towards the Manifested Timeway, there's a bunch of different adds in this area. The first is Coalesced Time. These guys, you just want to make sure you're interrupting every single cast of Infinite Bolt Volley. Bunch of party damage here if you don't, so be aware of that. And then Chrono Burst is going to go out on 2 players. You just want to make sure you spread with this, you don't cleave your friends, but be aware any of the kind of mobs you see but can't really interact with patrolling around in this area, those are called intervals, and if they're hit by this Chrono Burst, they will become active and aggroable and attack you. It's not the end of the world. These mobs don't do a ton. All they really do is temporal detonation at low HP, which you can interrupt, you can stop with a CC, or you can just walk out of the AoE, but just be aware that potentially you're going to be activating a lot of these, so if you can, try not to, but if you have to choose between activating an interval or cleaving your friend, you definitely choose to activate the interval. Time Stream leeches are all around the edges of this room, and they have a single cast in Enervate. This can be interrupted during the cast, but if the cast is successful, the only way to stop the actual channel this cast does is by using a CC, so be aware of that. This is also pretty dangerous, so it's a pretty high priority if you ever get a Time Stream leech in a pull. Stop this from going off for sure. Coalesced Moments are in this area as well. They just have a tank spam cast and infinite bolt, so any spare kicks you're going to want to put into this, but obviously other things are going to take priority. And then they have an important stop here in Tainted Sands. This is just a random target dot that goes out, and basically when combined with some of these other mechanics like Chrono Burst, like potentially an infinite bolt volley goes off, it really spells death. So make sure you're stopping as many of these as you possibly can. Temporal Deviations are one of the kind of just like throw-in mobs in this area. They have a single cast in Double Strike. This is just 2 arcane hits against the tank. Technically, this is stoppable, though the cast is quite quick, and as you can imagine, there's much more important stops in this area, so usually you're just going to let these go through and kind of ignore these mobs. Temporal Fusion, similar idea here. They have a triple strike, not a double strike, so they're getting 3 arcane hits against the tank. This is also a slower cast, so it's much easier to stop this. So if you were going to invest a stop to reduce tank damage, you're going to be doing that here on the Temporal Fusion mobs. But again, I do think stopping Enervates, stopping things like Tainted Sands is more important. The final mob in this area is one more Lieutenant mob which patrols around, and that is the Time Stream Anomaly. They have a Bloom hit. This is going to deal arcane damage to the tank, applies a magic dot to them and one other random player. So be aware, this dot ticks hard, even for tank players. So what you're likely going to want to do here is, assuming you don't have a DK tank, you can just AMS this off and have it apply to no one, is you'll likely want to dispel the random player that gets the magic dot, and you'll just have to heal through the tank. Obviously, if you have 2 magic dispels in your group, you can commit that to help a little bit, but you're going to likely have to heal the tank through this dot damage. Untwist is a frontal attack on the tank here. This mob does as well. You cannot avoid this, so just tanks, make sure you're pointing this cone away from your group. Once you defeat all the trash around the portals here, the manifested Timeways boss will spawn. Tanks, just be aware this is a stationary boss, so if you aren't in melee range, it's going to begin channeling Radiant, so you want to make sure to avoid that. Now throughout the fight, you're going to notice the room is kind of rotating around in a circle. There's 2 different distinct colors. The darker area is decaying time, and you're going to want to stay in here for most of the time, or as much time as you possibly can, compared to the lighter area, which is accelerating time, because you'll be both taking less ticking damage in the darker area, and you get a 20% DR compared to a move speed increase. There's a decent amount of movement on this fight, and a large reason for that is the fragments of time. These are going to shoot out in 2 distinct waves from the boss and kind of rotate around the boss, and I recommend, if you're a melee player, just rotate around the boss counterclockwise, trailing these spawn fragments basically, and that allows you to kind of easily just fit in behind them, particularly when they go through like a slow zone. For range, these fragments are easier to dodge again when you're in that slow area. You just need to be careful because the room is constantly also rotating the sections around, so if you're in an area that was slow and then it becomes fast, those orbs are going to shoot right at you, so just be careful of that happening. The only other thing to worry about here are the Chrono Faded magic debuffs. This is going to go out on 2 players at a time, and you're going to want to make sure that you run into the accelerating time zone, so the lighter zone, before you get dispelled here, as this makes the wave just tick super fast, and so the whole entire party only eats 1 tick of the damage event that it does, instead of multiple if you get dispelled in a slow zone. So very important, you know, the first player runs into the fast zone, they get dispelled quickly, and then you can kind of top everyone up, and then the second player knows, okay, I just need to make sure that I'm in this fast zone by the time this magic debuff expires, so then they can kind of stay in the dark zone a little bit, or just chill in the light zone. It's not the end of the world. Just make sure, again, this debuff is always getting expired or dispelled while you're in the fast zone. Moving towards the third boss here, there is a mini boss on the Timeway platforms. This is the Infinite Infiltrator. There's going to be the Timeless Curse swirlies kind of spawned throughout your engagement with this guy, and if you get hit by that, you're going to be stunned with a 5-second curse, so make sure you're avoiding those swirlies. And outside of that, there's just some pretty scary party damage from the Infinite Fury channel. This is a mini boss, so you can't CC this mob, you just kind of have to eat this damage, so make sure you're using personals, and make sure that healer CDs are rolling to have coverage, and make sure no one dies to this ability. Once you actually get towards the third boss's room, you're going to find a bunch of Blight chunks and Risen Dragons. Basically, these Blight chunks don't really do much on their own, but when they die, their necrotic essence causes them to buff the closest Risen Dragon with the Relentless Hunger and Rage effect. This is basically just a stacking 50% melee damage increase for 10 seconds, and so this is really only a big damage increase for your tank, so be aware of that. If you have a Soothe available, very, very good once you start killing Blight chunks to soothe off off these dragons. Now, outside of that tank hit the dragons are going to be gaining, they also will just passively be pulsing with necrotic outbursts, and this can be quite dangerous here, especially if you're pulling multiple risen dragons at once. So be aware of that. Again, personals, healing cities, those kinds of things, focus these dragons down ASAP because they're the most important mob in this area. Outside of that, they just have a ability, Blight Spew. This is just a random target, little swirly on the ground, pretty easy to avoid. From there, you'll be able to fight the Blight of Galakrond, and this boss has 3 phases, transitioning first at 80% health and then again at 50% health, and basically the boss will just gain 1 new ability in phase 2, then lose that ability and gain 3 new ones in phase 3. In terms of what you're going to have to be dealing with throughout the fight, the main one is the corrosion debuff. This is going to go on a random player, and basically if it expires, you get mind controlled for a bit, so you need to kind of bounce this to another player before it expires by running over them, and you kind of need to bounce this kind of back and forth, and then eventually the boss will use Blight Reclamation, which is a frontal attack on the tank, and at this point you want to make sure that the Blight has been passed to the tank, because if you get hit with this Blight Reclamation frontal, it'll eat that debuff and it'll be gone until the next one goes out. This debuff dot also hits quite hard, so if you ever get it overlapped with any other mechanic and you're not a tank player, make sure you do pop a personal. Because of how hard this dot hits, it's a very good idea to basically pass this between like the tank and one other player if you can, just so that ideally most of the damage is going to be centered on your most durable player, your tank. The key thing to note about this as well for Blight Reclamation is that the time between Blight Reclamation casts in each phase gets longer and longer, so you're going to need to bounce the debuff around, the corrosive debuff around, more times in P2 than you would in P1, and even more times in P3 than you would in P2. Outside of that, you just need to make sure that you're avoiding the corrosive expulsion swirlies that spawn at random locations, and also the boss itself is going to leave these blight seep puddles on the ground. Just make sure you're not standing in them. I recommend pulling the boss over to like one of the edges of the room, and then just slowly rotating as your melee need more space to do things like dodge or whatever it is, and range can just kind of chill in the center of the room. Now, once you push the boss to 80%, phase 2 starts. They're going to like kind of drop their debuffs, become a new boss, and the ability they're gaining here is Necrotic Winds. Basically just going to be a channel, deals pretty heavy ticking damage, and also just constantly throws tornadoes out in a few waves. Again, this is one of those things, if you have that corrosion debuff and you're not a tank player during these winds, you definitely want to make sure you personal. At 50%, again, the boss is going to split once more into 2 bosses this time. They're going to share HP. They're going to lose that Necrotic Winds ability, but they're going to gain a few more. Tanks, you want to make sure that you pick up Lozkaleth. Hopefully I'm saying that right. They're the only dragon of the 2 that can be tanked. The other one, Dazek, they don't get tanked. All they do is kind of spam cast Noxious Ejection at random players. They will move occasionally with Incinerating Blight Breath. Basically, Dazek's going to just jump to a random player and then try and shoot a cone through them. So 1, make sure you're not standing too far from the bosses, so tanks and melee don't have to travel too far to get them back stacked up and get cleaving going. But 2, just make sure that you are moving out of this effect. Also, a random player is going to occasionally be debuffed here with Necrofrost. This is just ticking damage that also roots you in place, so if you have a movement freeing effect, that can instantly break these. Otherwise, you need to swap to this and kill them as quickly as possible. Moving into the final area before Iridikron himself, you're going to notice some familiar trash. So Infinite Time Slicers, Chrono Weavers, and Epoch Rippers are all in this area. But there is one more mob that we haven't talked about, and that is Iridikron's creation. These guys have a single cast in Stone Bolt. It is interruptible, and it is stoppable with a CC, and it's going to just target a random player, deal nature damage to them, and apply a bleed. So you want to make sure all of these are prevented. In terms of Iridikron himself, energy here is essentially the boss's HP. During phase 1, your damage to the boss is going to increase his energy, and then phase 2 is going to start when he reaches full energy, and then phase 2 ends when you deplete his energy by again dealing damage to him. Now, in terms of what you're doing here in phase 1, if you're targeted by the Extinction Blast, you want to make sure you run into the shield created by Chromies here, the Timeline Protection Bubble. And also, you kind of want to use a defensive here. That bubble does give you a 97% DR for the initial hit, but the initial hit through that DR and the dot that is applied afterwards are extremely dangerous. So you definitely do want to still pop something here, especially because you're going to need to be soaking the Stonecracker Barrage immediately after this happens. So basically, after the Extinction Blast, all the players need to run in, 4 of you that aren't the tank are going to stand on top of the soak on Chromie, and then the tank player is going to stand in the little soak directly in front of that. And basically, the tank's going to take a bunch of physical damage from their soak. The group is going to take a bunch of nature damage from their soak, and by the tank standing in their soak, it prevents a bleed from going out on the entire party, and that bleed is stone crack. So that can be scary, so that's why you split the group a little bit here. If you do this successfully, the entire party is going to be buffed with timeline acceleration, so nice place to use your cooldowns if you're able to. Shortly after doing this, the boss is going to activate Earth Surge, the big absorb shield on themselves, so anything that deals extra damage to absorbs can be quite good on this boss fight. Also going to constantly shoot out rending earth spikes and deal ticking damage during this phase, so you just want to break this shield as quickly as you can. Shortly after you break the shield, the boss is going to cast a frontal in pulverizing exhalation and mark 2 players to spawn a pulverizing creation. If you can, dodge the cone in the same direction just so you stay together, spawn the adds real close together, tanks pick them up, and again, these guys are like the adds we just talked about, so Stone Bolt, random target, interrupt it, or CC it, don't let them get a single cast off, and then from here, this phase just constantly repeats until you get him to 100 energy. For tanks in this first phase, be aware the tank debuff is crushing Onslaught, and this can get quite scary, particularly it begins to stack up usually after you break the Earth Surge, after that pulverizing exhalation frontal goes out. That's when you're going to get the highest stacks usually, so you want to make sure you have a defensive up once these stacks start going up. Now, when the boss actually does reach 100 energy, he begins to cast Cataclysmic Obliteration. What you want to do here is get in the bubble, the Timeline Transcendence that Chromie makes. You get a big damage amp here, and just finish down the boss before he finishes this cast. And again, that's indicated by his energy. You do damage, it reduces energy. If his energy hits 0 before his cast time finishes, you win, otherwise you wipe. So it can be beneficial here to start saving your damage cooldown specifically for this phase and for the damage amp once you start seeing the boss's energy is getting close to max. Now that we've talked about the trash and bosses, let's go through the route. Notably here, at least on PTR, if you were just going to W key through this dungeon, you would be at like 120% count. It's very, very high. So I did add a very simple kind of straightforward skip to this dungeon just to avoid that. However, count adjustments are something Blizzard has done like literally the weekend before a season drop. So be aware, the specific route I'm covering in this video may change, but the link in the description is going to be adjusted accordingly. So, well, I can't change this video section here. I can update that link, so be aware of that. Going through here, though, again, always like to do a big pull off the top here. It's just Time Slicers and Chrono Weavers and a couple of Rippers here. Lust, all CDs, boom, blow that pack up. You can subtract the Epoch Rippers if you're a little worried, but I don't think it's too bad. Moving down here, 1 pack, and then you go into the boss. In the Timeways area, what I recommend you do is kind of pull these packs away from these groups of leeches here, just because, again, count is so high in this area. These leeches kind of stay towards the edges of the room here, so it's not the end of the world if you do pull 1 or 2, but ideally you are avoiding them. These guys are quite scary. They also melee for magic damage currently for some reason. Not sure if that's intended, but it's a little weird. Something to note is this Coalesce Time here and this Time Stream Anomaly here actually patrol along their half of the room. So if you don't pull this with pack 7, pull with pack 6, it could be either of these 2 packs. Not the end of the world. Just make sure you are on top of 1, this guy's kicks, and 2, this guy's magic dot. Quite scary again, so be aware of that. Once you defeat these packs at the gates, the boss spawns, so again, you don't need to actually kill these leeches, and also the position isn't quite accurate. I believe they're a bit further back, all of these leeches, so be aware of that. Then you can go towards this mini boss. Now, this is where I've put in a note. I haven't done this in the route, but notably, you can skip this mob, and if you can, it's a pretty significant time save because it's just a single high health mob. You'd rather avoid it if you can. Shroud on one side, distracting to face the other side is doable. Also, Lockgate is doable to skip this mob, so keep that in mind. If you do skip this mob, you basically just need to pull 1 extra pack in this area, but I've assumed you haven't because I don't like to put too many weird skips into the route here. Moving towards the third boss here, a note on these dragons here. These are not tethered at all, so it's easy to just actually walk in and just pull 1 dragon, kill that dragon, then pull the next one, particularly if you don't have offensive CDs plus kind of healing CDs, because pulling 2 dragons can be quite scary with the pulsing damage they do. If you have a lot of damage available, you can just pull them together. Just again, make sure you're focusing these dragons down and potentially soothing the one that has a bunch of stacks once you kill these blight chunks. Then you move into the boss here, and you're moving across. So this is where I put my skip. use Invis Pod or Shroud just through this area. If you would prefer to not have to remember to, save your pot, what you can do instead is you can skip this pull at the beginning and instead pull all this trash. You can see it also works out percent-wise. That works fine as well. Just a little weird because I prefer doing a nice big pull off the top and, getting less in LCDs. This is not quite as value, but it's something you can do if you just don't trust either yourself or your group to remember to save Invispot for this area. You can just Invispot immediately and just do this. So that might work as well. So keep that in mind. Both work. I think this is going to be a little bit more optimal here, but it's not the end of the world either way. And again, it's not the end of the world either if you really want to kill all this. But again, you're going to be at so much count. Let's actually look here what the count's going to work out to if you just W key. Yeah, 119% for some reason. But again, that could change. They've done it in the past seasons, just changing count up. So keep that in mind. Other thing to note for this last pack, just make sure you pull it towards the boss a little bit here, because there is RP that needs to be done, and you can trigger the RP while fighting this pack, which means that, the boss is going to be active when you're done. So that's really, really useful there. But that wraps up this video, guys. Hopefully you found it useful, and if you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more guide content, including +20 walkthroughs to help you get your Keystone Hero achievement and dungeon portals early on in the season. I'll have raid guides as well, normal, heroic, and mythic difficulty, plus much more. If you have any questions about this dungeon, feel free to drop those down in the comments below, or come stop by my Twitch stream at Tactics, where I'm also going to be streaming all of my keys and raid progression once the season starts. Big shout out to all of my subscribers over on Patreon. Your support really means a lot. Otherwise, thanks everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.